Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Walden.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another exciting episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime, and you're in for a treat today. Probably the most eclectic panel that we've had. But today we are examining a case that has captivated America for more than 3 decades. We're talking about the Menendez brothers. They are convicted of the 1989 murders of their parents, Jose and Mary Louise Kitty Menendez. Lyle and Erik have spent more than 30 years behind bars, to be precise, I think since, well, not too precise, but since the early 90s. But now Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon, he's up for re-election. We're going to talk about whether this was a political move or not, but he's way behind in the polling right now. But he is the LADA. He's recommending resentencing for the brothers. So could this mean freedom? That is the bottom line question. And also, are they rehabilitated? How do we know if they are rehabilitated? Best guess, sound the calm alarm. She is the matriarch of the show. She is my mother. She is a child Holocaust survivor. She's a licensed therapist, and she is a expert yeller at me. So you'll probably get some of that today as well. Next up, you got Lenard Vare, otherwise known as Len Vare. He's got nearly 30 years in correctional operations experience across California and Nevada, including as a Nevada State Prison Warden and a Napa County Jail Administrator. He obviously offers a very unique insight into inmate rehabilitation and prison reform. And then, last but certainly not least, Gordon Lyde, the big teddy bear. After spending nearly a decade in prison, Gordon has turned his life around. He's become a drug counselor and community advocate. And his personal journey through incarceration and rehabilitation sheds light on what real change can look like. And so, again, interesting panel here today, but perfect for this case. We're getting a little bit of breaking news right off the top that I happened to catch on this. So, DA George Gascon, he obviously had a big press conference, and he was asking for the resentencing of these brothers. There's legal technicalities, but now he is also putting his weight behind a possible clemency, a request for clemency through Governor Newsom. This is the quote directly. I strongly support clemency for Erik and Lyle Menendez, who are currently serving sentences of life without the possibility of parole. They have respectively served 34 years and have continued their education and worked to create new programs to support the rehabilitation of fellow inmates. This comes on the heels of Mark Garagos, who is their defense attorney, asking for clemency just this past Monday. The request now goes to Governor Newsom for consideration. Len Vare, let's start with you. You were the boss in a couple of prisons. I guess, first of all, can you just tell us the difference here between, let's say, clemency and a resentencing, sort of the nuances there, and how that could affect the release of the boys or not?
Well, generally, clemency is where the governor will determine that they've done enough time and they can be sort of allowed out, possibly a pardon, commutation of sentence, as opposed to a resentencing, which requires them to go back to court and then appear in front of the judge, and then go through that whole process to determine whether they need to be resentenced. So it's almost like a second trial. Generally, they go directly to the governor, especially with 30 years already done. That's sort of the route that they would most likely take.
Carm, I'm going to go to you next. A very broad-based question. I called you a couple times last night. You hung up on me. You said I'm doing my Lyle and Erik Menendez homework. I can't talk to you. Carm's getting more wild as the years pass, and she just hung up on me. She does her homework. She gets serious about it. Carm, your broad stroke kind of opinion. What did you learn in doing your research? And you don't have to tell us every single fact. We know you did the work, but what have you learned, and what are you thinking broadly here about the Menendez brothers?
Well, for 35, no, longer than 35 years, I've been hearing about the Menendez brothers. First of all, true confession, I did not see that movie that they made about them, which I'm sort of not deliberately, I didn't see it, but I think it was a good idea that I didn't see it, because I don't want to have preconceived ideas that other people dictate to me. And I read up a little bit on the trial, on the first trial, which was a mistrial, the second trial, what has been happening a little bit, what has been happening since then, and it brings us to today. I tend to be an optimist, and I tend to be pretty forgiving, and I think 35 years is enough in light of all the recent revelations about abuse, and even corroborated by the what are they called, the
Menudo.
Menudo. I even wrote
Menudo. You're close enough, Carm.
Well, thanks. That's good to know.
This is where Carm's trying to show you that she's actually done all the research. It's a guy named Roy Rosella, but
you have to show up.
We'll get back to that, Carm. Look at this, Carm. Kelly Wynn. Carm, my book arrives tomorrow from Amazon. There's a rule on the show. I'm not allowed to mention the book unless someone else does, but I have written a book under the same title. It is the first and only book that has ever been exclusively signed by a person who did not write it. That would be my mother. She signed pretty much every copy that has gone out. She had nothing to do other than sitting for conversations, which is a lot. But the book is 15% Holocaust, 85% life advice from a woman that's been through a lot, and it will definitely change how you view life. So there you go.
Anyway, I just want to take one moment, because thank you for all your greetings, whoever wrote to me, and I'm happy to be here.
Very nice, Carm. Look at this. If you're coming from an exotic locale like Rahway, New Jersey, or Germany, or Nigeria, let us know. I'm creating a list that I will read at the end. Gordon, to you, we'll go through some of the details, and then we can talk kind of more broadly about it. But a court date has now been set for December 11th. That's when you're talking about over 35 years or close to 35 years behind bars. December 11th isn't that far away. On that day, George Gascon is expected to ask the judge to resentence him, and they could be free after 35 years. If you were there, Gordon, and you've been there, not in this exact same position, and you knew that you had just spent 30-something years and a month and change away, your whole life can change. It's got to be crazy excitement, adrenaline, worry. What do you think is going through their mind right now?
Exactly what you said. All those feelings, sleepless nights, the anxiety, anticipation, but also fear. Fear is a big one, because the biggest thing, you don't want to get your hopes up. That's one of the things you don't want to do in there, and get your hopes up, like, and start planning. I'm going to be out. I'm going to be doing this, and hear that, no, you're not. That's the biggest thing. So it's kind of hard to navigate those emotions. You don't want to put too much energy into them, but you can't avoid them either, because they're there.
Those are great points. I was just taking notes on something you said. By the way, yeah, Jackie, shout out to Jackie. Gordon is the best guest. Jackie and Gordon are friends. Jackie's been on the show a bunch, and she's also part of Reentry. Is it Reentry Evolution Services?
Yes, Evolution Reentry Services.
Evolution Reentry Services. They're part of all this, so they're doing good work. So more on this December 11th hearing. It's sort of interesting. It's going to take place. The brothers are in a state prison outside of San Diego, but this is because this is the Los Angeles DA, and the crime happened in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills. A Los Angeles County Superior Court judge, a guy named Michael Jessic, he's going to be hearing this, and it's in Van Nuys, which is the valley in California. So the other side of the hill, I guess you would say, from Beverly Hills. The case was assigned to Jessic this week. He is a former prosecutor, and he has the power here to immediately grant this petition. So, I mean, Len, to you, there's the weight of the world, I guess, in some ways, is on this Superior Court judge's shoulders. There are other avenues, like we just talked about clemency. What does a judge do? And, you know, this is not an everyday occurrence. If you're the judge, what are you looking at to make your decision?
Sure. I've attended quite a few parole board hearings, so I understand the process that the judge would be looking at. And mostly what you're looking for is the public safety dangers, right? So by releasing these two individuals that have been in prison for 30 years, is there a risk to public safety? And primarily, just, you know, across the board, people that commit murders of, say, family members or somebody that they knew have a very low risk of reoffending again. In general, the most reoffending types of crimes that we see are related to drugs, alcohol abuse, you know, mostly substance abuse related issues. But people that, you know, somebody say in a crime of passion kills their spouse, the chance of that person then doing that again is very low for as far as public safety risk is concerned. So I would be concerned about that. In this case, because it was family members, the risk would be very low. I would be looking at their conduct and behavior while they were in prison. So conduct and behavior in prison, in 30 years, you could change a person's personality in 30 years by being exposed to prison life. You could go in, you know, completely green, have no understanding, and come out, you know, a real dangerous person, because prison will teach you those kinds of things. So I would look at the conduct while they were in prison. Did they get into fights? Did they join any gangs? Did they, you know, do things such as assault other people, assault officers, and those kinds of things? So those are the types of things that I would need to see. And in addition, the other thing that I would look at is, were they positively programming? Did they take classes? Did they, you know, attend, say, anger management courses, finish their schooling, etc.? Those are the types of things that shows that they've been engaged in sort of proactive, pro-social activities. So those are the three things that I would consider. Obviously, there's going to be some reports from the staff. You know, if you've been in state prison, there's classification that's done on an annual basis, if not sooner. Those records will be available for the judge to review, which will tell you, you know, what classification you are. If you went in at low risk and went to a medium risk and you went back to a low risk, you know, those are the types of things that I would be looking at. It wouldn't be that difficult as far as the judge is concerned to consider those things and then determine that the risk is fairly low if you release them back into society.
And on the heels of that, they've done some pretty remarkable things behind bars. And they've only, I was reading, in the 35 years between the two of them, there was one incident that was apparently minor, you know, connected to any sort of violence. And I think it was very early on. So between the two of them in 35 years, you know, they haven't really been written up at all for that. So a special shout out to Notorious Jules here, going through a bit of a rough time with a health issue. So we are wishing her well. I met her up in Orlando covering Sarah Boone, as I did Mossberg Mom, who says Carmen's a beautiful lady. This is interesting. We'll come back to this in a moment. Someone's asking if it should be judged separately, and I could ask the guest about that. But Carm, to you, at this hearing on December 11th, it's not just going to be, a judge. There's going to be statements made by both the family members will be there, as well as potentially prosecutors who would argue that they should remain in prison. One of the family members who we think might be there is a woman named Joan Vandermolen. She's Kitty Menendez's sister. She's got a few years on you, Carm. She's in 90, I believe. And Kitty's sister, she is very passionately asking for the release. What do you make of that when you've got the victim's sister asking for the release?
Well, what I did, I got a little compulsive about this, and I wrote down virtually all the relatives. Are they supportive or are they against? And I could only find one single brother of Jose who felt that the brother should stay in prison, and everybody else very, very strongly supported. All the other sisters, cousins, brothers, I have their names here, and they all for release from prison. And they even had a press conference, which I just don't know how I happened to see. And they were very vocal, and they have been supportive all along. As a matter of fact, one of the brothers of the deceased, of the murdered father, said that he feels now completely okay with greeting the nephews and taking greeting them in his own home and serving them dinner and letting them stay in his house. So
I read that also.
I would say 97% for the release.
That's good. That's good math, Carm. Purple. That's by the way, that is not a scientific number she just gave you, but it is a guesstimate. Purple coconut here. I'm going to toss this back to Lenard Vare, and then we're going to get to Gordon. Shouldn't their cases be judged separately? So it's interesting. They were tried together initially, but what about now? Do they need to look at Lyle and then need to look at Erik? It is a great point. They're grouped together as one.
Generally, you would have the prosecutor making that decision on whether to charge them together or separately. In this particular case, I think they would still be looking at their individual accomplishments, their files, and risk factors. The judge would look at both of them individually and then make the determination. My guess is the two of them are going to sort of come out almost similar in the end result as far as the risks are concerned. It's also the time for the courts, and trying to get this thing in December this quickly, it already seems like it's a feat just to get something that quickly in front of the judge. And so in the interest of time, I can see why they would want to do it together.
By the way, this comment that's up now, it's not done yet. IGG Rocks. She says, thanks for raising Joel, Carm. That is far from done.
It's not finished.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. I get yelled at consistently, and it will happen again today. By the way, happy Halloween to everybody. It is Halloween, and I'm going to take, look at this. I'm putting down some of these exotic locales. It's a lot of people from a lot of interesting places. This is one, Dubai. How about that? So Gordon, do me a favor. People are fascinated by this, and you've been there. These guys are basically institutionalized. They've known nothing else since 1989. What have their lives sort of day to day been like over these past 35 years? I mean, like what, and what do you think the mindset, like how has it changed over time? Like you start to realize this is your home, right? So what's their day like, and what do you think their frame of mind is as they were kept incarcerated longer and longer?
Okay, so their day is the same. It's like you get up, the routine is exactly the same every day. Holidays or weekends, it may differ a little bit only with staffing, with staffing needs and stuff like that. But you get up in the morning, you're off. There's breakfast. Then you may have rec at a certain time, and the mindset, you just become so regimented because you have to make sense of this. So you lock in and, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And you schedule your personal schedule around this institutional schedule. So you may say, to get through the mornings, I'm going to do 500 push-ups at 9 o'clock. I'm going to start my workout. And then I'm going to take a shower. Then I'm going to go to chow. And then I'm going to do this. And I'm going to read a book. Or what I used to do, I would make my bed first thing in the morning. And I would tell myself, I will not even sit on my bed until after Law and Order, which came on at 4:30. And that was how I mapped it out. And I became so regimented with that. That's the only way that much time can make sense to the human mind. You have to break it down into small compartments and make it make sense, if you will, if that makes sense. That's the only way, especially when you get a sentence, life without the possibility of parole. This is your home. Just to hold on to some sense of reality, some sanity, you have to make sense of it somehow. So you got to compartmentalize it and put it in small pieces.
I'm just so curious about that. Let me ask you a personal question. I like to sleep in. What are you allowed to sleep in prison, or you got to get your ass up?
It all depends on the facility. Now it's all facility based. Like in the state of Connecticut, state prisons in Connecticut, yeah, you can sleep in unless you're at a work release facility. But if you want to sleep away your prison bed, more maximum, higher level securities, yeah, you can stay in all that. You don't have to leave your cell if you choose to.
Like a guy like
I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah, like a guy like Diddy right now. Is he allowed? I mean, he's basically confined to his cell right now, isn't he?
Pretty much. So in protective custody, it's more. Sometimes it can be 22 and 2 or 23 and 1, which means 23 hours in the cell, 1 hour out, or 22 in the cell, 2 out, for your safety. And any movement, you're very isolated. So it's pretty much segregation. But for the most part, he's by himself.
Jackie has a question for you. We'll get to that in a minute. That's what I was just looking at. But Carm, this one's for you, from Melissa Navone. There's a lot of people who think that, look, they did this crime, you do the time, and it was a brutal murder. They allege that the father abused them, but why did the mother get shot so many times? And it was just gruesome. What if they weren't abused, Carm? Would this be happening? Kitty's brother, this is who you mentioned, is actively opposing their release. He does not believe that they were abused, yet Gascon, this politician, would not meet with him. Carm, I mean, I don't know that we're ever going to really truly know whether they were abused or not. I mean, we've had the great Dr. Ann Burgess on, who met with Erik prior to the trial, the first trial, and she believes that they were abused. But what about this idea, Carm?
I also think that they were abused, judging by many other clues to this. But some of the new developments are very concrete. They are not fantasies. If somebody else under oath testified that they were also molested by Jose, and on top of it, there is a letter that exists, and there are relatives who remember that for example, they asked this one cousin when they were about 8 and 12, I think, they told this cousin that they were molested, and she told their mother, Kitty, she told it to their mother, and the mother absolutely took Kyle and
Lyle.
Lyle.
Close enough. Close enough.
Change the names. Lyle, and instead of listening to him and accepting what he says with a little concern, she grabbed him and ran upstairs to tell his father what Lyle said, and she absolutely did not believe the son. But I believe that they were not. There were other signs, outward signs of the father being a violent father on top of it, beating them and such. And the mother was allegedly depressed, severely depressed. She even tried to kill herself. Weak, following the father's instructions, being under the father's control, and very involved, I think, emotionally, with being sort of brainwashed by the father, and the whole situation happened. I remind everybody, over 35 years ago, and they spent 35 years in prison, out of which they were separated for the first about only the last 10 years were they brought to the same prison and were united. Before that, they couldn't even though they were both in for life, they were in two different prison settings, so they couldn't even see each other. And there are other interesting developments. I don't have to go into it right now concerning their relationships.
Carm, we have a whole show ahead of us. We'll get there because they were both married. I psychoanalyzed why you called him Kyle and not Lyle, because your name starts with a K, Carmela, and you have feelings of guilt yourself for I don't know what, as the Menendez brother. Yeah, so therefore you accidentally called him Kyle instead of Lyle. I figured it all out on the fly. Jackie's back in the chat here. Gordon, this is an interesting question. What's the treatment like for them now? Because news travels fast. They know what's going on. The other inmates, I've seen people in the chat say, well, these guys are getting preferential treatment. They were rich. They were Beverly Hills kids. They've got documentaries made about them. I'm sure there's someone, down the hall who's been in there as long who wants clemency or wants to get out. So what is the attitude from other inmates right now, do you think?
A lot of that has to do with how they conduct themselves in their relationships in there. A lot of times we may look at situations from the outside here in what they call the world versus in there. And we may have an outlook that they may be treated differently. But if you conduct yourself with a level of respect and you have that respect between other inmates and the staff, other things like that really doesn't matter. So you getting out or the possibility of you getting out where you came from, all that kind of goes out the window, especially after 30 plus years. Your former life has disappeared. No one really talks about that. Maybe you even may become a local celebrity because your stories, there's a documentary on your story. So, but that really how you're treated and judged goes hand in hand with the character you display and develop while in there.
Well, Carm just dropped out. COE, you're gonna have to figure out what happened there. That could be a disaster because she's gonna have trouble getting back on. But it was great. It was great while it lasted. I hope it's okay. And the weather here is perfect, so she cannot use that as an excuse. Len, back to you here. So this guy George Gascon, the LADA, he did announce last week that he's gonna have them resentenced, but not just in any way, on quote unquote on a simple charge, on a simple murder charge, that would make them eligible for parole since they were under 26 at the time. This is California law. And then separately, the Garagos Mark Garagos, the attorney, is asking for a hearing for the brothers related to habeas corpus filing, and that's going to happen on November 25th. So 2 questions for you just off the bat is, what is a simple murder charge as opposed to just a murder charge? And then explain this habeas filing and what's going to happen there separately.
So I think it's the DA using colorful language. I've never heard of a simple murder charge versus not simple murder charge. It's murder. So it's varying degrees of murder. If it's premeditated versus, sort of impulsive and spur of the moment thing. So that's, I don't know why he's saying that. Maybe he's just trying to minimize the event to sort of appeal more to the public and sort of play the emotional part of that. The habeas is basically a motion that is filed to sort of justify holding someone in custody for any period of time. So the attorney files that, and basically the judge has to decide whether there's good cause to keep the person in custody. And that's simply what it is. And it's just, that's generally what the motion would be filed on that. But I did want to go back to a topic that Gordon was talking earlier, if you wouldn't mind, about
absolutely
the what the day is like. Recently, I was doing some death penalty defense work, and this person was sentenced to, he was sentenced to die. And I was speaking as a former warden, talking about, life in prison without the possibility of parole is not a pleasant alternative, but it is better than being executed. The individual had spent about 10 years in custody, and he refused the attorneys and the experts' request to change his sentence from death penalty to a life in prison without the possibility of parole. And he voluntarily requested that he is executed. So, life in prison without the possibility of parole is possibly even more scary. And you sort of go out of your mind about that possibility compared to being executed. So it's that much of a difference for some people.
Len, I got to ask you, have you seen, I can see Karin backstage, but COE, can you try to help her? Because the camera is basically on her nose, and you got to help her out, COE. They've been in prison longer than they weren't. That's true. But Len, I was going to ask you, have you ever seen a situation where there was a similar kind of appeal that they're low risk, let's say, and then they get out and do something unthinkable? Because this would be obviously worst case scenario for everyone, because these guys are so high profile. This would destroy like the system moving forward, I think, about releasing anyone. So have you ever seen that, where someone is low risk, gets out, and then does something incredibly dumb or harmful or violent?
Let me give you 2 examples. In one case, I was the warden at a prison where a young man at the age of 15 was sent to prison because he had used a rifle and killed his father. Very similar set of circumstances, only in that case, the father was sexually abusing him for years. And then when the father decided that he was going to sexually abuse the younger brother, who was, younger than 12, this boy decided that he needed to do what he needed to do. So he took his father's life. He was sentenced as an adult and came to prison. And I think he spent about 8 years. And for about the first 2 to 3 years, I basically had to keep him safe from everyone else, because he in Nevada, you could be under 18 and go to an adult prison if you're sentenced as an adult. And in those days, that's what occurred. eventually, enough people got involved in his case, and he was allowed to parole out, and he stayed relatively trouble-free. He did have some drug issues, but if you go through those kinds of experiences in your life, I wouldn't be surprised if someone turns to substance abuse just to cope. It's fairly normal. In the case that I just mentioned, where this person was looking for a death penalty, he had done a prior sentence in a state prison for 10 years for stabbing his girlfriend. He finished the 10-year sentence, he came out, and then he moved to another state where he got into a relationship, stayed trouble-free for about 6 years, and then he shot his girlfriend to death, and then he goes to prison. The question that obviously people ask is, well, why did he get released from the last one when he had used a weapon and he had stabbed his girlfriend? She survived, but the fact was, in some cases, you have a mandatory amount of time that you need to do, but once you're done, they have to release you. There's no way that they could hold them past what the time was. And so a lot of times you will find these guys more likely getting out because they've done the maximum you could possibly get out of them. And then they're released, and then something bad happens. That particular person suffered from severe mental health issues, was schizophrenic, had bipolar disorder, untreated for years, and he had all kinds of issues with drug abuse and everything else. Those are the kinds of things that led to the second murder, or the second crime, which resulted in the murder. So I think those are the factors that you look at. In this particular case, you have two boys that were allegedly sexually abused, and I have no reason to believe that that's not true, because I've seen these kinds of things happen multiple times with people that I've worked with in custody. It happens more often than we would like to believe. Children are abused sexually. A lot of women in prison, about 70% of them, there was a poll done once where they all had been sexually abused by someone that they trusted. So 70% when it comes to women. Men generally don't want to tell that they've had those kinds of incidents happen. But when I do pre-sentence reports, or when I'm looking at someone's background and history, I find that it happens a lot more than we would like to believe as a society, which is why I think most likely that happened, because there was no other motive for this to happen. So that's kind of sort of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, interesting. Very quickly, Len, if they are released, in general, can inmates profit from the murder? I know there's laws in certain states. What about the Menendez brothers? They could become very wealthy again. It's unclear how much money they have left. I don't think probably, their families, I think all doing well, but I don't know how much inheritance. But can they profit?
I think there are some states where you can't write a book and profit from it. Even if you make any money, it goes to a victim restitution fund and those kinds of things. But because this is family, I don't know if there's a civil suit that's been filed against them. I don't believe so, which would prevent them from earning anything that might be considered a profit. Obviously, they have to go outside and make a living. People are going to be interested in their story. So, I mean, unless there's a civil suit filed, I don't see how you prevent that.
Joel?
Yes, Carm.
I have to take just 1 second break to tell you what happened.
Please do.
Suddenly my computer said no internet. At that point, I went on my phone, and right now I am on my phone. I left the computer on, and right now I'm back on the computer also. So now I am double. Now you have two mothers.
Well, listen, go on to the.
To annoy you.
I'm gonna remove you and try to go back to the computer, and the COE will help you.
I'll leave it on this. Let's not stretch.
All right, then just stay there. Then
Yeah,
all right,
I'll stay right here, but I'm definitely on StreamYard that I call Barnyard.
Yeah, she calls it
Okay.
Barnyard, even though it's StreamYard. Thank you for that update, Carm. I don't know what we would all do without it, but I was going to say, Carm, that Space Coast on the West Coast, he is the man who gets all our audio and everything else and puts out the audio podcast. He is saying hi, Carm, but congrats to Spacey. I was watching that Yankee Dodgers game last night. I was looking forward to game 6 because it was all but certain to happen. The Yankees up 5-0. My 5-year-old in T-ball could have played better defense than the Yankees. I just got so annoyed that I wanted them to lose at that point. So I'm glad that they lost. And on to next season. Aaron Judge is making $40 million a year to drop a routine fly ball. Pitcher doesn't cover. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to get all riled up. Gordon, to you from Super Planner Girl, who's a friend of ours, friend of the show, and does so much behind the scenes. How difficult, Gordon, this is the $64,000 question, will it be for them to create a normal life for themselves after such a long time in jail with notoriety and other factors? Is it even possible? We all famously know that scene in Shawshank Redemption. The old guy's let out, and he just can't handle it. He just doesn't know what to do. Sunshine with a very similar question. I mean, this is an extraordinarily long amount of time. This is before Google, before Facebook, before cell phones, everything. And now they are let out into the quote unquote real world. What could that be like for them?
It's terrifying. To quickly answer, yes, it is possible. Many of us have done it. However, it will require some deliberate effort. Because it's funny, it's like to tie into something I was said earlier. After 30-something years in prison, you know who else has a hard time starting a normal life? Correctional staff once they retire. Mm-hmm. Because going into a prison or living in a prison for that many years will affect and change anybody. So will it be an adjustment? Yes. Is it entirely possible? Absolutely. But it's going to require some deliberate effort, some planning, a lot of therapy, because you will have severe trauma from just being the isolation, the cutoff from so many different things. And then to come back into a society where, although this is the weird thing about it, life is moving on. You see blips on TV, what's happening. But still in your mind, the last picture you've seen of outside was how you left it. So when you come back out, it's a huge culture shock. Now all of a sudden you're holding these devices in your hand. Buildings that weren't there are now there. Everything has changed. And you have to now reintegrate yourself into this society.
So what's let me ask you, what is kind of the first step in that process? I guess you've got to kind of go step at a time, but that first night at whoever's relative's house they stay at, it's got to be crazy, where you can turn on, ESPN or whatever. You've got, hot water. You don't have to get out of it. What is the kind of the first step or two in the process?
Just taking it easy, because that first night, you're going to do the same things. You're going to have the same mentality because just the night before you were in prison, you'll probably ask for permission to do everything. You'll probably get in the shower without thinking about it with shower shoes on. You probably, if the phone rings, you're not going to answer it. You're not going to touch keys. Psychologically, you have to readjust. And only thing I could say is take it easy on yourself.
I have a question.
Wow. That's fascinating what he just said. You can ask permission to take a shower. You're not going to touch keys because that's used to unlock. Carm, what is the question, Carm?
The question is, how will this affect their marriages, since both of them were, quote, married for a long time without actually consummating the marriage? Interesting. Gordon?
It's going to be adjustment. It's going to be the physical contact. It's going to, although you would think, oh, I'll be all for it, it's going to be weird. It's going to be an awkward situation, readjusting that closeness. because it's the intimacy is not about a sexual thing. It's about being close to another human being like that, where you came from an environment closest night like that. You don't really get that close to someone. So now you have to unlearn and relearn basic things all over again. It's going to be extremely overwhelming, and you're going to be with a partner that does not understand. They don't get that part.
So will the marriage survive?
I believe everything can survive if both parties are very deliberate and intentional in this. If both are, then and allow themselves fluid room to grow and learn. Because if you're regimented and you're rigid, no, it will not. It will break.
That's fascinating. And I don't think they've had conjugal visits. So Gordon's right. It's simply like a platonic relationship based on, emotion or whatever else it is hinging on. But this comment from this is interesting. Lyle has never been in a fight in 34 years. In fact, he had to be moved to the special needs yard when he was attacked and would not fight back. What purpose does keeping them behind bars serve? And then there was a comment that I lost right after that basically said, why should they get special treatment? Leave him in there. So it's a very polarizing conversation. Mar Plum here. Carm, thank you as well for your wisdom you have shared with us. Great to see you. And then jury duty, you got to let us know. Your grandfather played for the Yankees. Who is he? You got to let us know in the chat. I'm curious. Let us please know the answer. The brothers, I think they were housed together or are being housed together at the very end. Carm, I want to read you. I got an email today related to this, and she gave me permission to read this, and I'll get your reaction, Carm. The email goes, I know that you and your friends had some experiences with the Menendez family. I understand how eerie it feels. I was Jose and Kitty's private banker in New York City. I knew Jose when he worked at RCA Records, and I visited him at his office. We were alone, and he closed his office door. He played a Eurythmics video and was dancing around the room. He flirted with me and said that I had nice legs. I felt uncomfortable, but thank God nothing happened. I just feel sick to know that I was a young woman alone with an alleged rapist and pedophile. When Lyle and Erik were arrested, I was hoping that the abuse allegations of her parents were not true. Now, with all the evidence, it seems that it was true. I feel sorry for what the boys went through. Jose would send new record albums to me at my office, and Kitty sent me greeting cards after they moved to Beverly Hills. It's interesting because people have little vignettes. Obviously, my playing tennis with them a little bit, but Carm, I mean,
I have a reaction.
Please, I thought you would.
Think I don't understand in hindsight now why doesn't she realize that Jose liked little boys, not women with nice legs.
Is it mutually exclusive, Carm? Could he have liked both?
Well, that would have been even a little bit too much for Jose.
Well, there you go.
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there holding the candle.
Yeah. Len, so my mom mentioned the series on Netflix. It's one of the most popular ones right now. It's called Monsters. It's interesting because I never thought of it. I just assumed it was referencing Lyle and Erik, but it's kind of nebulous. Some people think maybe it's referencing the parents. So could go both ways here. Gavin Newsom even commented on it. He says, and I quote here, this is the governor of California, I met with the team that put the series together about 9 months ago, and they gave me a heads up. They said, watch and see what happens after the series is released, because it's going to generate a lot more conversation around whether these guys should be released or resentenced. And here we are, fast track, not so many months later. What are your thoughts on the fact that, a documentary is made? It's brought up, in media and pop culture, and this is sort of what's being attributed to the quote unquote fast tracking of their release. This to me doesn't seem fair, but it is, as I tell my kids, nothing in life is fair. They're high profile inmates, but your reaction to a Netflix series potentially being one of the catalysts for all this?
Yeah, I think we live in a world where information moves so fast. Something that happens here is put on social media, and all of a sudden it catches like wildfire, and it's worldwide news. So I'm not really surprised, given that that's the world that we live in. I mean, Tiger King. I mean, to think that that became sort of such a thing, right? That was a Netflix show, and people sort of latch on to something that catches their imagination, or people are fascinated by these kinds of things. So I'm really not surprised that sometimes these stories can sort of shape public opinion.
Carm, how about this? And I'm getting back to Gordon. By the way, Mary Ann, I believe, is our friend in Serbia, Carm. Shout out to Mary Ann. Brothers Menendez are so very nice to each other, and not all brothers are. The pain united them uniquely like twins. Carm, there are in this show Monsters, there is a scene, and it's been discussed and talked about, that the boys back then were also basically forced to pleasure each other, for lack of a better way. So if this is true, it really is sick. But what do you make of their relationship, that they seem to be very much linked at the hip, and basically inseparable?
It makes me think of a very wild, far out analogy. People, when they have cancer, they can best relate to other people who have cancer. They understand them better than people who don't. And these boys, when they were boys, they had this very, very scary, where in a place where they should find the security, protection, and safety, namely in their own home. That's where they were abused and mistreated, and they only had each other, really. The two parents were a team. The mother, I am very upset with if indeed the mother behaved the way it's described, because as a therapist, I ran into a lot of uh, child abuse by the stepfather, by the live-in lover, and the mother not responding firmly enough, and allowing this to go on. And we even had a case, I forget now the name of the girl who turned 13 on her birthday.
Maddie Soto.
Yeah, Maddie Soto. And also the mother had a blind eye there, and didn't want to see it. So I don't know why I got into this. I forgot where I started. But in any case, the point is that they were living in a family that was not safe. There was no safety and security in that home, and they only had safety and security with each other. But what's interesting is that for a while they didn't even share with each other the abuse until they opened up to each other. That was too painful, and they came from a background where nothing was discussed openly. As pathological as my family was in some ways, we could bring up anything for discussion, and everything was permitted to be discussed. In this family, they were all keeping very secretive and silent and not sharing, and so the boys picked up the same behavior.
Yeah. There's a really twisted, the reason I think among many that they were SA'd by their father is, and there's one particular detail that you just could not make up. And I've talked about this before, so cover your ears, because this is a little disturbing if you don't want to hear it. But Erik did say to a therapist that he would put cinnamon in his father's drink, secretly put cinnamon in there, because it would change the taste of his semen. Hard to hear that, difficult to hear that, but how could you come up with something that specific and detailed if it wasn't something that was sort of actually happening to you. So very disturbing detail that has always stood out to me. Not to mention, you guys know this, I grew up playing tennis and I had friends that were friends with them. And there were just some weird reactions at some parties that they had where they kind of, you know, when people say my parents are going to kill me, they're joking, but they seem to be more serious about it.
But they usually had those parties when the parents weren't there.
Yeah, but I remember one time someone spilled red wine and Lyle and or Erik, like they flipped out to a unnatural degree, saying my dad's going to kill us, because it was on a white carpet, red wine. And, you know, I would say, hey, my mom and dad are going to kill me, but I didn't literally mean it, but it seemed like they were speaking literally at the time. Butterfly kisses, not boys. They were grown men. Stop saying boys. Listen, they were alleged to have been abused when they were young boys, starting at, I think, at 6 and 8. Obviously, they're men now. They were 18 and 21 at the time of the crime. I know that's adulthood, but you're not fully formed at 18 or 21. Legally, you are an adult, so that is a good point. But I'm talking emotionally. I think that's what people are saying when they use the term boys. Went through this question already. So, Gordon, some interesting details during their time behind bars. As we talked about already, both brothers got married. I think one's been married since 99. Both got college degrees. And by the way, one was at Princeton, or headed to Princeton. I mean, they were smart kids. They both started prison groups. Among them was a meditation group. Another was a green space project. I think they are also helping victims of SA. What does that say about them, that they were starting these groups in prison? How do you even start a group in prison? And are you looked up to for doing that?
Yeah, you are kind of looked up for doing it. It looks good for you that you're doing something positive and you're including others in that to create this aura of change. And it's beneficial to you because they have a saying, you do the time, don't let the time do you. And if you create activities, if you create a curriculum, if you will, and do stuff to advance yourself, to grow, you're making good use of that time because you're going to be there. Or you could sit there, because if you look around, you will see others in there that are having the worst time. The time is beating them down. Like correctional staff see it, other inmates see it. They seem to age. They just so depressed. A lot of them become very medicated because of the trauma that they endure before enduring being in there. So if you don't actively use your mind, because that's the only thing you have control over, you'll succumb to that, the pressure of being in there.
Bonnie Gropper in the chat makes a very good point here. I'm not bringing it up because I want to get to Len on this question, but does anyone realize how hard it was as a young man to come forward alleging SA 35 years ago? If this happened today, they would never have gotten this much prison time. And that's very important. You have to put it into historical context. It was a different world. And in their second trial, they were only allowed to bring in very minute details about the alleged SA. It was basically kind of just brushed off. The state argued in motions and they won a lot of those motions. But to Len from Sunshine here, two questions for you. Number one, there's apparently some back and forth or different factions in the DA's office. Not everyone wants this, so there's fighting within the DA. And also this, if they are released, would there be a probationary period, and roughly how long?
My guess is it'll be a lifetime probation. Usually for someone charged with murder or something very serious, it's usually fairly long, but lifetime is.
And what does that mean exactly? So do they have to check in with probation officers? How often? How does it work?
So generally, probation goes with the idea of if it's intense supervision, or if it's a type of probation where you just need to make a phone call every month, sort of a check-in. The intense one is drug testing. They need to go up to the probation office. They need to check in. The probation officer will show up at your house unannounced. They will make you do urinalysis testing unannounced. They will go to your work. So you feel like you're still in custody to some degree, with some sort of a strong tether attached. As time goes on, if you've been on probation for 1-2 years, they tend to sort of loosen those tethers, and you're placed on something where you just make a phone call, you check in on a phone call, or you come in once every few months. So those things get easier over time if you've shown a pattern of good conduct.
Jennifer Levy, question for Carm. This is for you, Carm. How does a victim of familial SA trust anyone if they tell other family members what happened to them and that person ignores them and allows the abuse to continue? This is maybe hinting at the mother turning a blind eye. Your thoughts on this, Carm? When it's happening within a family, who do you tell? Who do you trust? Who can you? Who can't you?
It becomes even more generalized than who can you trust in the family, who can you trust in the world. And that's part of the syndrome of the abused person. There are a bunch of traits that you develop or that are warped and not enough developed by being abused, such as, first of all, the issue of self-esteem is affected. You don't trust your own judgment. You don't trust your own moves. You don't think you are good enough. All the bad stuff that lack of self-esteem brings with it. And then you have they luckily don't seem to have anger management. They seem to be okay without outbursts of fighting or violence, but sexually abused people have also difficulty in other areas, not just in the area of self-esteem, like anger management, like uh, uh, long-term relationships, letting somebody emotionally close to them later. I don't see how they are not affected, and this is with therapy, without therapy. By the way, can I open a parenthesis about the therapy that they got after
Please,
this?
Carm, you can open whatever you'd like. You're the
Okay.
matriarch of the show. You're the star of the
Okay.
show.
All right. Well, they
I
had
do all
this.
the work, but you're the star. I do all the work. I write the books. I do the
It's
podcast. I
only
do the
fair.
research.
It's
But,
only
go ahead,
fair.
Carm. That's
It's
what
only
happens.
fair.
Go ahead. I'm
They
not
had
bitter.
this. They went for therapy, and unfortunately, they fell upon a therapist, a psychologist. Maybe he was a PhD psychologist, who was a bad apple, bringing embarrassment on the
Dr.
whole.
O'Neill. Dr. O'Neill. Yes.
No, not Dr. O'Neill.
You're talking about
Oriel or Ari. I will tell you his name in a minute. I wrote down his name.
is it? It's O'Neill. Oziel.
Oziel.
Yeah.
Oziel.
Yeah. Oziel. Yeah. Oziel.
Jerome Oziel.
Yes. His mistress
Judalyn
reportedly.
Smith. Judalyn Smith. This was a Beverly Hills psychologist. Okay, his office was in Beverly Hills, and he was quote treating the brothers, and at one point he had a mistress who lived with him. They use the word mistress, a little bit of an old-fashioned word, but I use it also. And he started to tell the story of his visits with the patients, and then the patient revealed that they murdered the parents, and he proceeded to tell it to his girlfriend. Then he broke up with the girlfriend, and the girlfriend marched over to the prosecutor's office and announced that this is what she heard secondhand from the psychologist. So the initial therapy attempt was absolutely backfired on them.
Mhm.
And then I think later in the prison, they had a therapist. I hope they had a therapist. Not that I think it's a panacea that it will cure everything, but still, it's very important to get some therapy when you went through what I believe they went through. Not everybody believes it, but I believe that they went through that abuse issue.
I'm curious where that woman is, the mistress is
Oh,
today.
I tell you where he is.
He's in New Mexico, right?
Subsequent to that, his license was taken away, not because of this incident only, that he told, he betrayed the professional confidentiality, but also because he was behaving inappropriately with other female patients. And then there is a very funny little irony. They took away his license, or he handed in his license more accurately, and then he became a not a therapist, but a leader of women's group to teach them how to behave with men.
And I think he's doing that in New Mexico. From Kathy here, a random question. Gordon, is your mother still with us? I can only imagine how proud of you she must be. And if she's not, I don't think she'd mind if I speak on her behalf. You are a rock star. Is she still with us,
Thank you.
Gordon?
Yes, yes.
Huh.
Oh,
And what does she
good.
think?
So-
And Gordon, do you argue with her like I argue with my mother?
Every day.
That means you have a good relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, she tells people I'm her father. She introduces me as her father.
As FYI, Joel, Aaron Judge would not disappoint me if he walked up to home plate and just stood there. Oh man, he's a big manly man, 6'7". He just can't catch a routine pop fly that my 5-year-old
May I
can
ask
catch.
you? May
Yeah.
I ask you something?
$40
Are
million
you
a year. They need to put clauses in that if you play like crap in the postseason, you get half your money or 3/4 taken away. It should be based on merit, not $40 million a year. And this guy Juan Soto on the Yankees is about to get paid $60 million a year. Carm,
Joel, is this what you are referring to? Is this when two guys in Yankee uniforms grabbed the ball and twisted his arm to take the ball out of
no, that was an interference play. That's a whole other thing, Carm. But I'm glad that you're on top of.
it? I just saw that in some newscast. I thought it was interesting.
Carm's trying to impress us with her Yankees
I
knowledge.
always try to impress you.
So Gordon, in terms of going back out on the outside, we're gonna wrap in just a couple of minutes, but or sooner, but and that's always a challenge with Carm, but we will wrap, I promise. Back to talking, about being on the outside. They were incredibly the parents were incredibly wealthy at one time. Some people think that they just did it because of the inheritance, but you said they might, they're gonna have to go out and earn money. What kind of jobs can you get on the outside? They're probably an exception to the rule, right? But in general, it's hard probably to get steady income and strong jobs because you're a convicted felon, right?
Absolutely. Like, so if their it's a totally different thing if their family steps in and helps them, or because some agency, they want to do a series on them and sell their story. That just comes with the notoriety of their case. But without that, the job you're going to get is entry level, because coming home, especially if you have stipulations, probation, you're only going to get entry level, dishwasher, whatever, and you'll have to work your way up. You're not going to come out and become a CEO of a corporation unless you have someone that puts you in that. And it doesn't matter how smart you are, what your aptitudes are. The first thing they see, unfortunately, is that scarlet letter of convicted felon.
I have a comment on that one.
Yeah, please.
Because these guys are in California, California has some rules with ban the box where you don't have to explain that you've been convicted of a felony or you did time in prison. There's a law that protects people that are coming out of jails and prisons. Also, there are many agencies that I know of, government agencies in California, where they do hire ex-offenders and they do get into positions, as long as they're not like working for the sheriff's office, but they do hire ex-offenders. And I've seen that in many counties in California where they do that. I've seen some people that have gotten out. I have a friend of mine who did time in prison, I think over a decade for armed robberies. He was running a nonprofit and very successfully running a nonprofit. So there's people that do that. I have another friend in San Diego who just recently wrote a book, and he works with California Department of Corrections. He works with probation departments across the state, does a lot of stuff with young people and young gang members. So I don't want to sort of leave this with the idea that it's not possible for them to sort of integrate back into society and be quite successful. It really takes some work, but it's possible.
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I'm living proof of that. Like, I've been out 20 years. I went back and I worked for the Department of Corrections. I've worked in the same prison I was housed as a clinician. I've done many things. It's just in the beginning, it's going to require, you're going to have to kind of sometimes lower your expectations, get an entry-level job and show your worth and build yourself up. Because a lot of times, everything the world is not rolled out to you, because Connecticut also has banned the box. So things have improved a lot since I came home. But a lot of times it requires some effort, the ability to be able to explain some things, and just have that fortitude to say, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. And the sky's the limit, because I know a host of people that is extremely successful after their stint in prison. That didn't define them.
Well said. Here's a super chat. It's an interesting number on there. But after watching the second trial and lawyer closing arguments, I stand with Kitty and Jose. The brothers had complex and oversensitive personality when they were young. I believe now they repented and are mature. They lied about SA to avoid the gas chamber. Interesting take. So you see, not everyone buys it. I, for one, do. I think Carm does. What would happen next? So we've got a couple of different things, but in relation to this December 11th hearing, if this Judge Jesic, J-E, by the way, Carm, is that a Serbian name? J-E-S-I-C, Jesic, Carm?
No.
Okay.
Needs a C in the end.
It is a C in the end. I just said J-E-S-I-C.
Oh, there may be.
There you go. So I wasn't that off. If the judge grants a petition, the state parole board then has to weigh in. As of October 23rd of this year, so far this year, the board has granted parole at approximately 31% of the cases it has heard. The governor can block the parole board. Len, before we get final thoughts, talk to us about this parole board. Who are they? Who makes it up? And they, I guess, are the ultimate deciders of what's going to happen here.
Right. The parole board in most states are appointed by the governor. They serve a certain number of years as their term. Usually when the governor changes, the parole board tends to change, and then you bring in new people that the governor wants to appoint to those positions. The reason they're going to be possibly looking at talking to the parole board is if their sentence gets changed and restructured to life without the possibility, and it gets altered to a life with possibility of parole, then because of the time that they've already done, they would become eligible for a parole hearing. And in a parole hearing, you have a board that consists of sometimes 3 to 5 people, and a majority would have to agree that they would be suitable for a parole release. Sometimes you go in front of a parole board, they say, well, you haven't done any programming, you haven't done anything to better yourself while you're in prison, so we'll see you next time around. Sometimes it's 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Usually that's how that works. But these guys seem to have done pretty much everything that you would want to see leading up to a parole hearing, even though they weren't expecting it. You know, they got their degrees, they're involved in positive programming, they've not gotten into trouble. All of those things are, as a parole member of the parole board, I would be looking at, and it seems like they would be actually very suitable for parole if they get there.
So there you
Can I ask you something? Would the fact that most of the family supports them have an impact, or it's irrelevant?
It is very relevant. In parole board hearings, you could, you have parole board hearings where someone kills a police officer, for example. A lot of police officers will write letters to the parole board opposing the release of someone who's, killed a police officer. So you get letters, you get statements, those kinds of things happens in parole board. If there isn't a lot of opposition and the family members are saying, hey, they've done enough time, we would like to see them come back out into society, yes, that will be weighed heavily in the decision making.
So very interesting panel. Amazing best guest as always. Gordon Lyde is a former inmate, turned his life around, runs various programs to help inmates. Now, Gordon, the big question, of course, was, have these now men been rehabilitated, or are they the same people? What are your final thoughts on this? Do you think they have changed, and do you think they should be let out at this point?
Based on what I've heard of all their accomplishments, everything they've done, I think they have earned the right to be heard for a chance to get out. I believe also the resentencing, since they're inputting evidence and talking about the sexual traumas, things like that, because 30 years ago, as you mentioned, there wasn't a lot of talk about it. There wasn't a lot of awareness to it. So all the telltale signs that were missed back then can be seen now, because if that situation happened now, there would have been a lot of questions, a lot of raised eyebrows at the change in behavior, because I'm quite sure even as children going to school, the private schools, there was a change in behavior when abuse starts. So it's a lot of questions that weren't asked then that would have been asked now. So I believe with the introduction of that, yes, I believe they should get the resentencing and things should change. They've paid their debt.
There you go. You're hearing that from a guy that paid his debt. Lenard Vare, Lenard, and I remember the first time he was on, I called him Lenard. I don't know why, because I'm used to seeing the O in Leonard, and it wasn't there. But Len Vare, great guy, a former prison warden, and works within the criminal justice system still. By the way, does Ann Burgess think they should be released? I will speak for her because she's been on the show, and she was very clear that she thinks that they should be released. And look at this. Everyone's got an opinion. Keep the sickos in prison where they belong. They are not rehabbed. They are sickos like their parents. Abuse is no excuse. Followed by this, neither here nor there. You impress me, Carm. You impress me also, Carm. Len Vare, I guess the ultimate question is, do you think they should be let out? But how do we know whether or not they've been rehabilitated?
Well, like I explained in my earlier part of the show when the question came up, is the likelihood of them reoffending is extremely low. Their behavior in prison has been exemplary. They have not gotten into trouble. They've done everything possible to stay out of trouble. Just based on that alone, I would think that would be really, really something that I would consider. I think it's time to consider them rehabilitated, although I don't really believe that's the right term, because I think they were victims of circumstance. They were very young, and today, if we had that same trial, the sexual assault thing would have come up, and they would have been front and center instead of it being sort of like a by note. Yeah, I think they would probably do very well.
There you go, coming straight from former prison warden. Of course, we always leave the last word, which is dangerous, with Carm. So the show could go on another 40 minutes. Everyone buckle in. But Carm is the matriarch of Surviving the Survivor. If you haven't heard, there's a book that I wrote about her that she signs. But it is life advice. It's her child Holocaust story called Surviving the Survivor, available anywhere books are sold. And I will ask Carm. I know her answer. So my two girls are going trick-or-treating with their friends. My 5-year-old boy, who is going to be a vampire, he is going to be trick-or-treating in our neighborhood, and I'm going to invite Carm right now, but she's going to tell me, like she told me yesterday, I'm too tired. You had me do all this work to prepare for this show. How do you expect me to do the podcast and then come there and go trick-or-treating with your son? Carm, is that still your answer?
Wrong, because this wouldn't have tired me out. But I had an exercise class before this that tired me out.
What
So
are you doing, Carm? What do you
I
do in the
think
exercise class, Carm? Walk us through this exercise class.
Joel, this is not part of the Menendez brothers.
I'm interested. What did you do? What did you do today in exercise class? I'm curious. Might be the best part of the show. What did you do in exercise
Well,
class?
one day I'll tell my teacher to videotape us.
Okay, but you do like squats. Like, what are you doing? Like,
I do squats. I do. Today I did all the machines. We went. All of us went one by one through the machines.
I'm proud of you, Carm. I think I'm going to try to go to the gym right after this, but I'm feeling.
That's another thing that the Menendez brothers did that you have to admire, that they exercised.
Those guys are in great
But
shape.
I guess people in prison have to, otherwise you just sit around like I do now all the time, and you need to move around.
There you go. Carm, let's get back on track for a final moment or two. Do you think these men now, once boys, who were allegedly very badly abused by the father and the mother turned a blind eye, how do we know that they've been rehabilitated, and should they be released at this point, in your opinion?
Well, I think that everything has its risk. There is, I don't know what percentage risk there is that something would be that a mistake will be made. Maybe maybe we are too lenient. We are leaning towards you and I, Joel, that like we think that they should be released, and maybe there are people who are more strict or had more strict upbringing, feel that they should be kept in there. There are risks. There are no guarantees. You cannot say it with 100% certainty that everything will be hunky dory and everything will work out perfectly. But sometimes you have to make decisions on the basis of not complete data. And in this case, my modest opinion is you should let them go after 35 years.
Carm gets the last word. Let him go. Sherry's News. Carm, when I listen to you, I feel bad sitting on my chair watching the podcast, Sherry, immediately do 10 squats. Please stand.
No, yeah, get up and walk around. That's what I try to do sometimes when I sit too long.
Tomorrow, Phil and Scott are supposed to be here. We're going to be talking about this au pair who murdered her lover's wife. And it's a complicated story that I admittedly have to continue to read up on, but we'll be doing that with Phil and Scott. Until tomorrow, love you, America. These are the countries that were in the chat today. Love you, Nigeria, Germany, Portugal, the Republic of Ireland, Austria, Barbados, UK, Dubai, Johannesburg, South Africa, Concrete, Guinea, Scotland, and Spain. Carm, what do you think of the fact that these countries were present in this chat, Carm, before I let you go?
Well, it's because it's in a good hour where it's not nighttime there yet. That's why they are more different countries.
What about, do I get any credit? Do I get any credit?
I mean, the internet is wild, except when it conked out on me right in the middle of the session. And it said, it showed even that it's the internet. And then I tried to put on the phone and it wouldn't go on because there was no internet. And then the phone very politely, Verizon asked, would you like to go on your blah, blah, blah? And I said, yes. And that's how I got back here.
Maybe we'll do a show with me and you and Gordon and his mother. Could be a high rating show. We'll have to see. You think she would ever agree to it, Gordon?
You never know with her.
There you go.
Her mood and her decision-making moves like New England weather. If you don't like it, stand still for about 2 seconds. It'll change.
All right, everyone. Have a great night. Happy Halloween. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, guys.